Welcome to the New World Order Showcase Podcast. Your host, Jill Hart, the Coach's Alchemist. Couldn't be more excited to have you join us today. On this podcast, we celebrate the champions of change, the up-and-coming life, health and transformational coaches who are fearlessly stepping forward to make a difference in the world. Get ready for inspiring stories, practical tips, and powerful moments that will motivate you to make a positive change in your life and those around you. We're happy to have you join us on this incredible journey as we dive into the world of life, health, and transformational coaches who are lighting up the path towards a better tomorrow.
Welcome to the New World Order Showcase Podcast. Today, Geoffrey Kent is joining us. He is a serial entrepreneur. He's got some great stories, and man, he was going and going and going before we got the video rolling, and I just want him to share from his own experience. So I'm just going to turn the mic over to you, Geoffrey. Go.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you have a couple of questions to ask me, and
I do.
To get me started, but yeah, I'm a semi-retired serial entrepreneur. I sold my last company a decade ago, and it was a private cloud computing technology service company. I'm based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm not sure what else you want to know, but again, kind of at this stage of the game, I'm trying to do my best to give back. I've had a very blessed life, and I've got two beautiful daughters, and in their early 20s, and I'm just trying to do what I can to use my God-given entrepreneurial talents to encourage other people to be as crazy as me and do what I've done, and help them with their journey, so they don't, they'll probably face the same obstacles I face, but hopefully I'll give them the tools to be able to navigate above and around those obstacles easier than I did. And from my perspective, the world needs more entrepreneurs. I actually think entrepreneurship can solve some of society's greatest problems, like poverty, unemployment, and crime. And
it's going to change the world.
Yeah.
Right now, the opportunity has never been greater. It's just like, it's like COVID was this terrible thing, but it was this really great gift as well. And if you look at it as like, it was the gift. It was the gift that allowed us to open our eyes and say, hey, we can take control of how the world's going to go. Right. It just starts with one person. I know you got your start at Xerox, because we were talking about this a little bit before we got started. Yep. And I was telling you, I was stalking you over on LinkedIn, and you were telling the story about your time with Xerox. Yeah. And it's about the things that you learn when you're young, how they can serve you as you get older. Yeah. But tell us that story, because that's a good one.
Yeah. So I wrote a blog post about my experience with Xerox, and kind of the end of the blog post, I asked readers the question of, if you could turn back the hands of time, what would you change in your life? And then I answer, for myself, and I basically say that for me, I wouldn't change anything other than my ability to comprehend what I was learning when I was learning it, so that I could actually make my life a little bit easier along the way. But yeah, Xerox provided at the time world-class sales training. They used to send all their sales reps to Leesburg, Virginia, where they had their international training facility, and they would teach what's called spin sales techniques, and it's basically solution selling. And I was at Xerox for 2 years. Unfortunately, I learned what I needed to learn along the way. I didn't learn it quick enough, so I ended up getting fired from Xerox because I didn't meet quota for 2 consecutive.
Tell us the badge story, the badge part of the story.
Oh yeah. So, but towards the end of my my time there, as I was learning, how to sell, I realized that Xerox had accomplished something that, successful companies do, and that they laser focus on dominating a niche target market so that their name precedes them, right? So it occurred to me somewhere along the line at Xerox that the process of making a physical copy of something is called xerography. And Xerox as a company was started based on that technology. So when I would go to visit, I had a geographic territory, and initially it was the northern 5 most counties in New Jersey, and then they switched me over to the 3 westernmost counties in Connecticut. And I would start my day, 8:30 in the morning. I would hit the nearest office park, and I would literally park my car and then just hit a building and just go in and knock on doors and try to get past the receptionist and hopefully talk to someone to talk to them about buying a machine. But what I realized, again, because the process of making copies is called xerography, that people refer to their copying machine as a Xerox machine, regardless of who the manufacturer was. And so, being a Xerox employee, I had a Xerox badge. So I got to the point where I was like, okay, what I'll do is I would go to the receptionist, I would flash my badge and say, I'm here to fix the Xerox machine. And, no one would question that. They would just say, okay, fine, but I'll buzz you in. And once I got in their office, I would literally just walk around to look for, the biggest office, in the building, and knock on that door. And because I figured, well, that's probably the CEO, or, at least the most senior person in this office. Let me knock on that door, start from the top and work my way down, because even if that person wouldn't talk to me, if they referred me to someone, I implicitly got the referral from someone, the big boss, right?
Right.
So,
right.
And interestingly enough,
endorsement.
half the time, again, this is 1979 to 81. The business marketplace is predominated by men, and so most of the people I would run into were men, and half of them, literally half of them, would just be shocked that I would have the the gravitas to do that, and then they would talk to me. Not all of them bought, but I would, in at least 50% of the cases, get an audience and could talk about what I was doing. So, as I said, that I didn't learn what I needed to learn fast enough to take advantage of that at Xerox. Xerox had a policy of, if you miss your quota for 1 month, you got placed on probation. If you miss it for 2 consecutive months, you got fired. So I got fired. But I had an experience as I was being fired of getting past a receptionist at a office park in Greenwich, Connecticut, and I didn't realize this at the time, but there were two individuals who had tried to get past this same receptionist just before me, and so when they saw me get past, they literally waited for me in the lobby. And then when I came out, the more, there was a guy closer to my age, and then a much more senior person. The more senior person handed me his business card and said, hey, give me a call when you get home. And I, just being young and foolish, didn't think much of it and just put his card in my pocket and went on my day. But when I got home and kind of went through my pockets and pulled out this business card, this was a district manager for a computer science corp. I'm like, oh, okay, this is interesting. Maybe I should give this guy a call back. And ultimately, that led to me getting my second job at AT&T.
That's a great story. And it just goes to show that even though something may seem like it's a terrible thing in the moment, because nobody likes to get fired.
Yeah.
But, getting fired isn't really a bad thing.
Yeah.
in the 70s and 80s, it did have a stigma attached to it. It was like, I failed because I should keep this job for the rest of my life. And in 20 or 40 years, excuse me, I'm going to retire and sit in front of my television set and wait to die. Because that was the plan in the old days.
Yeah.
Now it's just like, man, it's an opportunity. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
And now the door's wide open, because if you hadn't been fired, you might not have followed through on something that really probably did make a difference.
Well, I mean, as I said, it led to my second job, which was with AT&T. In 1981, when I joined AT&T, AT&T was the largest company in the world. They had the largest workforce, and they had the largest amount of sales of any company in the world. And so I was sent to sales training for my first year. And then I was given a geographic territory in the 5 boroughs in New York City. And in my first full year in the field, I became AT&T's #1 salesperson. So,
wow.
You know,
what were you selling? Because the telephone industry was way different back then.
Yeah, so when I joined them, the AT&T was still a monopoly. So they were being broken up by the federal government, but they hadn't been broken up yet. So AT&T had long distance service, local service, to make phone calls. There were actual telephones you were selling, and you were also selling kind of the first generation of computers as well. So it's, both data and voice communications. We're kind of selling a little bit of everything.
Yeah, I remember those days when, most of the people probably who will be listening to this podcast won't remember modems.
Oh, yeah.
And dialing in.
Yeah.
And that was really a huge thing. And in terms of the internet really wasn't much of anything until the 90s.
Yeah. Well, so my last company was a technology private cloud computing company. Mm-hmm. And, I was the oldest person in the company. Everybody I hired was in their 20s. And I remember one day coming into the office, and all the techs are in the conference room, and they're just laughing hysterically. And I'm wondering, what are these guys, what's so funny? So I go in the conference room, and they're all staring at, a computer, and they're basically, they had pulled up I think it was a YouTube video that was talking about the history of technology. So they were looking at the original cell phone, which was basically a suitcase, and they're just laughing hysterically.
And the double discs.
Right. So I'm looking at this stuff. I mean, it was
10
funny.
megabytes.
But then it occurred to me, I'm like, that's my history. I know, I saw that stuff. I used a lot of that stuff, and
we used to fax machines with the phone.
Oh yeah.
People have no clue what that was all about.
Yeah. Well, well, as much as, I've seen, my grandfather, my dad's father, I actually lived until he was 110 years old. So he passed while I was in graduate school in 1992. And I remember he was from Beckley, West Virginia. He was a coal miner for over 50 years. But when he turned 100, my parents went to Beckley, West Virginia, and picked him up and brought him to upstate New York, where they live. And so for the last 10 years of his life, he lived with my parents. And so once they did that, every birthday he would have, once he hit 100, I was the person that would kind of coordinate his birthday parties. And so I would make sure he got cards from the president, senators, Congress people, mayors, whatever, in cities, any city he'd ever lived in, or city or state he had ever lived in. And then we would have, I would notify local media. So all, ABC, NBC, CBS, and Syracuse would send a team out. They would actually film the party. We'd have hundreds of people at the parties. And so they'd film the party. The newspapers, they have a morning and evening newspaper. They would send teams out to interview him. But the first year when he was 100, one of the newspaper teams came out, and this young lady put an old cassette player on the table in front of him. And when she turned it on, you know, I mean, I'd never seen my grandfather jump that fast and that high, you know, I mean, because he had, you know, I mean, he was just shocked at he didn't know what it was. So it made me think of, oh my God, he was born in 1882. What are all the technology he's seen since he was born?
Horses
Yeah,
and
yeah. I mean,
buggies.
when he was born, cars didn't
Cars.
exist, radios didn't exist. I mean, there's just so many things that you know. So anyway.
Wow. What a 100-year period to go through.
Yeah, yeah.
And just in our lifetimes, because we're very close to the same age.
Yeah.
It's like so much has changed.
Yeah.
And it was so incremental, but suddenly we're here. And it's
yeah.
like, wow.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I always just to put things into perspective, like when I think of my grandfather, like he was too old to have fought in World War I. You know, like wow. Yeah, that's yeah, a life lived.
Yeah, yeah. That's wild.
Mm.
Very cool that he lived so long.
Mm-hmm.
So you're working with Alignable these days?
Yes. Well, so what I'm doing is I created something called Entrepreneur University on Alignable. So we're beta testing an education series. So, and how this came about, probably, I'm going to say 2 or 3 months ago, I had gotten a call from one of the leaders of a business group on Alignable. And they were, you know, she was asking me if I would serve on a panel. They wanted to have a panel discussion with some entrepreneurial leaders, you know, to you know, just help entrepreneurs understand, you know, things that would help them in their businesses around entrepreneurship. And so I, you know, I agreed. I absolutely, I, you know, love to speak publicly. So, you know, happy to serve on a panel. But as we started to talk, you know, I really asked, you know, what are you trying to accomplish? And so, you know, she got into, you know, we would like to differentiate Alignable as a platform from other social media platforms, and that we're hoping that it can become a platform that can actually, you know, transform, you know, these entrepreneurial businesses and the entrepreneurs that are running them. And so when she mentioned that, I said, you know, I don't have anything against panels. I said, but I'm not sure that's the best mechanism to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. So I'm like, can you give me a couple of days? And I've been thinking about how to impact the entrepreneurial community for actually quite a while. And I've got some ideas that I think might accomplish your goals a lot better. And I can put, you know, a position paper together for you if you can give me a couple of days. So she's absolutely. And so I put together just a 1-page document that talked about leveraging entrepreneurship as a way to solve global poverty. So
wow.
And she loved it, you know. So she's like, okay,
I love it.
I've got three groups that I lead on Alignable. She said, let's beta test this with one of my groups. And so, you know, basically on May 30th, we did a kickoff event where I kind of told the community, this is what I'm going to teach you in this 6-part series. Then we had an event on June 12th where I kind of gave my poor man's version of, you know, Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech. I wanted to tell people, you know, in my mind, this is why I think something like Entrepreneur University is so needed today. And just basically share my vision. And then we started on June 19th. We actually had a session last night. So for 6 consecutive Mondays, we've had sessions where I've taught or tried to teach entrepreneurs the 6 essential things that I've discovered successful entrepreneurs do to succeed, right?
You want to name them off?
Yeah. So, you know, number 1 is successful entrepreneurs take the time to figure out what they're passionate about, and then they build businesses around their passion. You know, once they do that, they laser focus on identifying niche target markets they can actually dominate. Because again, like that Xerox story, what they realize is that when you become the dominant provider of a product or service to a market, regardless of how small, it could literally be one customer. When you decide you want to expand outside of that target market, your name will have preceded you, which makes the sales process infinitely easier, right? They also they focus on forming innovative strategic alliances to get away from what everyone else does, which is push selling or pushing a product or service on an unsuspecting market that doesn't know whether or not they need this and what your motivation is for pushing this on them, to pull selling, where because you have strategic alliances who market on your behalf, they actually feed you with pre-qualified leads. So it's forming strategic alliances with larger companies in 4 specific quadrants. And this comes from a book called Co-opetition, written by two professors, one from Yale, one from Harvard. And they talked about this concept called the value net, where your value is enhanced when you form strategic alliances with companies that offer complementary products and services to what you offer, to your supply, forming alliances with your suppliers, with your customers, and with your competitors, right? It's infusing world-class customer service into what you do, so that you transform customers into evangelists who sell your brand on your behalf. It's focusing on the leading metrics that lead to sales, not just the lagging metrics that you of course have to report on your financial statements for the IRS to pay taxes, and for investors who have invested in your company want to see how you're doing. But it is focusing on those things that lead to sales, and that by doing that, you have a much higher probability of actually both either meeting or exceeding your sales goals on a consistent basis. And then the last thing they do is they surround themselves with an A-team of, whether it be co-founders, executive leaders, managers, staff, advisors, and board of directors, to give themselves the highest probability of achieving whatever their vision is for their venture. So those are the things that all successful entrepreneurs do,
Yep. Yeah. Put it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Alignable's an exciting platform. I think people are kind of stumbling onto it, and just beginning to see the power that those kinds of connections can provide for people.
Yeah.
Well, joining groups, I think, is a really key component, and being active in the groups.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I tell people I think Alignable is what LinkedIn wanted to be, right? Sometimes, and I've had this happen multiple times in my career, you can be too early for the market, So, I'm not sure that people were ready for what Alignable is, 10 or 20 years ago, and so, but now they are, and I mean, there are 7 million entrepreneurs on the platform and growing. So
and it does keep growing, and it's really, it's exciting. It's like, it's not like anything else out there, really.
Right. But even with that, I don't think there's any platform yet that is truly teaching entrepreneurs how to scale responsibly exponential business growth with their ventures and get from launch to exit, and that's really
do that.
Yeah.
Exactly what I do. It's taking starting at the beginning, but having the big picture in mind when you start.
Right.
You build a solid foundation, you know what you're doing, and you follow those 6 principles that you just described. You can grow, you can create a business that is scalable. But if you start out without a plan to scale in the end game, then you're going to constantly be plagued with problems that come from kind of mismatching things together to
Right.
try to figure out, okay, so now what's the next step? Now what's the next step? And you're constantly buying different things or joining different things without having a clear picture or vision.
Right.
The Bible says, without a vision, my people will perish.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what it's all about. It's knowing what you're trying to create, having the end in mind, and starting at the beginning and with what you're passionate about. Everybody is gifted with some unique skill, ability, thing that they do to solve someone else's problems, and it's probably a bunch of other people's problems that are suffering just like they were, but they figured it out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love to use analogies because it's just easier for people, it tends to be easier for people to grasp. So I always, when I talk to entrepreneurs, I normally start with, one of the first things I tell them is, launching a successful business is you want to do this the opposite way you'd read a book. You read a book, you start from the beginning and work your way to the end.
Yes.
With a business, you start from the end and work your way back to the beginning. You have to know, what the exit is, when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen. It may happen differently than you had anticipated, but you want to be able to articulate to yourself what your exit is going to be, because then you can reverse engineer what growth has to be year in, year out to get you to your exit, right? So, and the other analogy I give them is in business, one or two things is going to happen. Either you're going to die before the business does, or the business is going to die before you do. So with that being the reality, why not plan what that exit is going to be? Why not orchestrate that exit, instead of trying to let that happen? Because, if you just leave it to fate, chances are it's, the exit that ends up happening is not going to be the exit you desire. So, yeah.
Yeah. And there's every strategy or every exit point is a perfectly fine one. Nothing is static in the world. So no matter what you're doing, you're going to have to be changing. About 3 years is the lifespan of any thing that you're trying to do.
Right.
After that, you're going to have to adapt, or you're going to get wiped out by something else that's come along. We can see that with even the big technology companies, and they try to innovate. Facebook keeps coming up with new iterations, but they're not as dominant as they once were.
Right.
So they had to come up with a new thing, and then they have other things that are competing with that. And then it's just kind of interesting to watch it on the grand scale. But even as individual solopreneurs, we have to think like that too.
Yeah.
Mark Zuckerberg didn't start the head of the or head of Facebook, didn't wake up one morning and suddenly he's this big giant octopus, tentacles everywhere. He started out as a solopreneur somewhere along the line.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that entrepreneurs get caught up on when you start talking about exits is, I hear this constantly. Oh, well, I don't want to sell my business. I'm like, well, selling a business is one exit. That's not the only exit. I could list at least 8 distinct ways to exit a company, only one of which is selling the company. So I said, what you have to understand is that the objective should be, may not be for everybody, but it should be to create an exit event somewhere in the future that allows you to extract some of the capital that you successfully built in building this venture, so that you can secure you and your family's future, right? And create generational wealth with whatever that capital is you've extracted from the business. That should be your goal. Otherwise, I'm not really sure why you'd be doing this,
Right.
You don't want to just, okay, well, I love what I'm doing. Well, that's great. That's important. But you can't do it forever. I mean, we all have, life is finite. So, do you want to work as hard as you're working when you launch? Because entrepreneurship is incredibly difficult and it's a lot of work. Are you going to want to be working that hard when you're 95, right? And when you extract capital from your successful venture, and now you don't actually need to work, but you decide you may still want to work becomes a lot easier. when you don't have to do it. So, so anyway, yeah.
Life is a lot easier when you're not desperate.
Yeah. It's a good way to put it. Yeah, absolutely.
Is there one thing that you would like to leave the audience with? Just a takeaway that hopefully they can put into action or take to heart?
Yeah, there's a lot, but again, I kind of lead back to that first thing that successful entrepreneurs do. I mean, if and I'm assuming everyone's that's listening to this podcast is an entrepreneur or wants to be an entrepreneur, but it really revolves around, do what you love, take the time to find out, who you are, what your strengths and weaknesses are, what your likes and dislikes are, and then start to investigate businesses that allow you to leverage both the things that you're really good at and the things that you love to do. Because, what's going to happen, particularly early on when it's just you have to do everything, right? So you better love it, because it's going to be tough. You're going to run into obstacles. And the problem is that when you don't love what you do and you run into obstacles, it's easy to just give up and say, hey, I don't really like this, so I'm just not going to do this anymore, and that's not the outcome you want. I mean, so it makes more sense to love whatever it is you do, build a business around that, and then when the obstacles come, it's a lot easier to say, well, this is hard, but I really love what I do. So, I'm gonna pick myself up, dust myself off, and start over again, and just keep going, because every no just gets me closer to yes,
Yeah, and don't be afraid to get help.
Yeah,
There
absolutely.
are a lot of people out there and a lot of resources for finding help with whatever the particular thing is that you're struggling with. And it's not, again, start at the end.
Yeah.
Turn to the back of that book and work forward from there.
Yeah. Well, it takes a certain mental state to even pursue entrepreneurship. Some things that come to mind are you're probably a little crazy, you're probably a little arrogant, because at the end of the day, it's like, the way I define entrepreneurship is, I said, you'll know someone's an entrepreneur if for instance, you love going for walks every day. If you can go out for, your 1 hour walk and come back and you have, based on what you've seen in your walk, 100 things that you think you can monetize, you're more than likely an entrepreneur. That's right. We view the world through monetization, right? So that's a good sign. But the other things that will definitely let everyone know you're an entrepreneur is you think all 100 of those ideas are the best idea that mankind has ever thought of, one. And then two, and this is the harder part, is you're actually willing to go homeless to prove to the world that any one of these 100 ideas is the best idea mankind has ever seen. And so I always tell entrepreneurs, figure out if you possess those traits. If you don't, that won't prohibit you from pursuing entrepreneurship. But an entrepreneurial venture won't be successful without someone in the business with that mindset. So if it's not you, find someone who possesses that mindset to work with you, and then launch your venture. But yeah. And again, so when you think of someone as like, who in the world would go homeless for an idea? You'd have to be crazy to do that. Well, that's why people call entrepreneurs crazy.
Yeah, and it's just the amount of action you need to take repeatedly, no matter how many times you run up against that brick wall, no matter how many receptionists tell you no.
Right.
And you just got to get over the no. No is just an answer like yes. Maybe is the worst answer you can ever get from anybody.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just like a no without taking responsibility for that decision.
Right. Well, I tell stories all the time about entrepreneurs just to help other entrepreneurs understand how difficult the process is and how much resilience is required and how much perseverance is required in order to succeed. And I'll use an example of, there's a woman called, her name is Kathy Hughes, who owns a business called Radio One. It's one of the largest, well, it's the largest African-American owned radio conglomerate in the world. And, so she worked at, Howard University's radio station when she was in her 20s, was married and had a young son, and she decided, hey, I want to become a radio station owner. And so she was trying to get loans to buy a radio station. And the stress of, all of that, she lost her marriage, and then here's this young woman with a young son, and she's trying to get loans to buy a radio station. Well, ultimately, she's able to buy a station, but she was actually rejected for loans, like I think it was 53 times. And
wasn't uncommon.
Yeah.
Not that long ago. Women who weren't married, you were second-class citizens.
Yeah.
The civil rights movement didn't just help African-American men.
Yeah.
It helped women too.
Right. But I tell people, I'm like, do you honestly think you could hear no 53 times and still get up and come back to hear it a 54th time, which of course, fortunately for her, she got up, dusted herself off and went back again. And that's the 54th time was when she heard yes. But for the average person, I mean, you really just have to think about it is, how many times could you hear no before you got so discouraged you gave up, right? And for most people, it would probably be 5 or 10, not 53.
Yeah, that is just an amazing story. I love stories like that. It gives me goosebumps, and it's just like, yes,
yeah,
you can do it.
Right.
Don't stop.
Yeah. Well, I always, I chuckle when I hear people talk about, some successful entrepreneur and, they're an overnight success. I'm like, there's no such thing. No, I said, no. Unfortunately, when you're struggling, no one, the media doesn't find you interesting. They're not writing about you while you're struggling. So with every supposed overnight success story, when you dig into the history, what you'll find is that there is probably 20, 30, 40 years of struggle to get to the point where everyone considers them to be an overnight success, right? So it's just that.
And you don't really know what's going on behind people. I mean, there are some people that are like TikTok overnight stars,
right?
But those are kind of flash in the pan things, and they're not creating generational wealth. Mm-hmm. They're creating a lottery.
Yeah.
So it's just a windfall of income that's not really sustainable.
Yeah.
Because they don't have an exit plan.
Right.
Not going to go on forever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, well.
Geoffrey, it has been marvelous chatting with you this afternoon.
Yes. I've enjoyed this conversation as well.
So thanks for joining me, and I encourage people to go to thinkbigwithgeoffreykent.com and join Alignable and find Geoffrey on Alignable and friend him or connect with him and go take advantage of the university that he's got out there. I think people will really benefit from that.
I appreciate that. You've just done. I encourage everyone to do the same. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another empowering episode of the U World Order Showcase podcast. We hope you've enjoyed hearing from our incredible life, health, and transformational coaches who are making a profound impact on the world. Remember, change begins with you, and you have the power to transform your life and the lives of others. If you want to take that next step and unlock your true potential, visit thecoachesalchemist.com, where you can find the 3 ways we can help you for free to spin your talent into gold with clarity, a system, and a plan. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an inspiring episode. And if you enjoyed today's show, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback means the world to us and helps us reach more people with our positive message. Stay connected with us on social media for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and upcoming guest announcements. You can find us on Facebook at The U World Order or simply visit thecoachesalchemist.com.